Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Read by Ugo Agoruah. Chapter 2, Part 4, Enter the Self. But what do those first-person pronouns refer to in the lines above? Those we's and ours that are supposed to control attention. Where's the I? The entity that decides what to do with the psychic energy generated by the nervous system. Where does the captain of the ship, the master of the soul, reside? As soon as we consider these questions for even a short while, we realize that the I, or the self, as we shall refer it to from now on, is also one of the contents of consciousness. It is one that never strays very far from the focus of attention. Of course, my own self exists solely in my own consciousness. In that of others who know me, there will be versions of it, most of them probably unrecognizable likenesses of the original, myself as I see me. The self is no ordinary piece of information, however. In fact, it contains everything that has passed through consciousness. All the memories, actions, desires, pleasures, and pains are included in it. And more than anything else, the self represents the hierarchy of goals that we have built up, bit by bit, over the years. The self of the political activist may become indistinguishable from his ideology, and the self of the banker may become wrapped up in his own investments. Of course, ordinarily, we do not think of ourselves in this way. At any given time, we are usually aware of only a tiny part of it, as when we become conscious of how we look, of what impression we are making, or of what we really would like to do if we could. We most often associate ourselves with our body, though sometimes we extend its boundaries to identify it with a car, house, or family. Yet, however much we are aware of it, the self is in many ways the most important element of consciousness, for it represents, symbolically, all of consciousness's other contents, as well as the pattern of their interrelations. The patient reader who has followed the argument so far might detect at this point a faint trace of circularity. If attention, or psychic energy, is directed by the self, and if the self is the sum of the contents of consciousness and the structure of its goals, and if the contents of consciousness and the goals are the result of different ways of investing attention, then we have a system that is going round and round, with no clear causes or effects. At one point, we are saying that self directs attention. At another, that attention determines the self. In fact, both these statements are true. Consciousness is not a strictly linear system, but one in which circular causality obtains. Attention shapes the self, and is in turn shaped by it. An example of this type of causality is the experience of Sam Browning, one of the adolescents we had followed in our longitudinal research studies. Sam went to Bermuda for a Christmas holiday with his father when he was 15. At that time, he had no idea of what he wanted to do with his life. His self was relatively unformed. Without an identity of his own, Sam had no clearly differentiated goals. He wanted exactly what other boys his age were supposed to want, either because of their genetic programming or because of what the social environment told them to want. In other words, he thought vaguely of going to college, then later finding some well-paying job, getting married, and living somewhere in the suburbs. In Bermuda, Sam's father took him on an excursion to the Coral Barrier, and they dove underwater to explore the reef. Sam couldn't believe his eyes. He found the mysterious, beautifully dangerous environment so enchanting that he decided to become more familiar with it. He ended up taking a number of biology courses in high school and is now in the process of becoming a marine scientist. In Sam's case, an accidental event imposed itself on his consciousness, the challenging beauty of life in the ocean. He had not planned to have this experience. It was not the result of his self or his goals having directed attention to it. But once he became aware of what was undersea, Sam liked it. The experience resonated with his previous things he had enjoyed doing, with feelings he had about nature and beauty, with priorities about what was important that he had established over the years. He felt the experience was something good, something worth seeking out again. Thus he built his accidental event into a structure of goals, to learn more about the ocean, to take courses, to go on to college and to graduate school, to find a job as a marine biologist, which became a central element of his self. From then on, his goals directed Sam's attention to focus more and more closely on the ocean and on its life, thereby closing the circle of causality. At first, attention helped to shape his self. When he noticed the beauties of the underwater world he had been exposed to by accident. Later, as he intentionally sought knowledge in marine biology, his self began to shape his attention. There is nothing very unusual about Sam's case. Of course, most people develop their attentional structures in similar ways. At this point, almost all the components needed to understand how consciousness can be controlled are in place. We have seen that experience depends on the way we invest psychic energy, on the structure of attention. This, in turn, is related to goals and intentions. These processes are connected to each other by the self, or the dynamic mental representation we have of the entire system of our goals. These are the pieces that must be maneuvered if we wish to improve things. Of course, existence can be improved by outside events, like winning $1 million in the lottery, marrying the right man or woman, or helping to change an unjust social system. But even these marvelous events must take their place in consciousness and be connected in positive ways to ourself before they can affect the quality of life. The structure of consciousness is beginning to emerge, but so far we have a rather static picture, one that has sketched out the various elements, but not the processes through which they interact. We need to now consider what follows whenever attention brings a new bit of information into our awareness. Only then will we begin to get a thorough sense of how experience can be controlled, and hence changed for the better.